YouTube now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. People are dialing in. We're giving a few more minutes. But if you're expecting to be at the launch of the Thailand Green Infrastructure Investment Opportunities Report and panel, you are in the right place. We will certainly get going in a few minutes. As you can see, if you're on Zoom, the numbers of listeners are climbing. This webinar is also being live broadcast on YouTube as we speak at the Climate Bonds Initiative channel. So you can certainly let people know to look at it there if they wish. It will also be available as a recording on our YouTube channel. So if you think that one of your colleagues would find this of interest, you'll be able to send them to the Climate Bonds Initiative channel on YouTube and they can have a look at the remarks afterwards. But today we have a star-studded cast of people to talk about green opportunities in Thailand. In a couple of minutes, I'll turn it over to Mr. Anuj Mehta, who will make some introductory remarks. We will hear from Krista Dukanen about the content of the report that we're launching today. And that report will be placed in the chat box of this webinar if you're on Zoom, so you'll be able to download it, or you can go straight to the Climate Bonds website, where under our reports function, you'll be able to download this report as well. But look in the chat during the course of the webinar, and you'll see it added there for download. Special note to Letitia, make sure we add it there. Okay, I think we might get going if we can. Today we have, as I said, a star-studded cast. We have Anuj Mehta, who's the Asian Development Bank Country Director in Thailand, or just taking up the post. We're expecting great things from him there, and everyone's job is to make him really work hard to do a brilliant job in the area. He has been the unit head of the third innovation hub at Asian Development Bank, but most importantly, and this is how we've got to know him at Climate Bonds, has been the originator, the lead for the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, which has been very influential in mobilizing capital and deploying capital in the ASEAN area for green. And Anuj will talk a little bit about that in a minute when I ask him to make some introductory comments. I'll just mention, however, the other speakers. We'll bring them online or on screen a little later. But apart from Krista, who's head of research at Climate Bonds, we also have Jongkwan Kongsakul, who's the Assistant Secretary General for the Securities and Exchange Commission and the co-host of this event. We have Suryat Thadikuluat, who's the Chief Financial Officer of BTS Group Holdings and a significant green bond issuer in their own right. We have Parosh Uttacharyan, who's the Senior Expert on Bond Market Development, the Public Debt Management Office in the Ministry of Finance. As you know, Thailand has already issued green bonds in the past. And we have Vashinarawan Ithitharaman, apologies for my pronunciation, Director of Investment Research Department at the incredibly important and huge Government Pension Fund, who will talk about the nature of their interest. We'll start off, if I may, with Anuj to make some introductory remarks, set the scene, and of course, Vashinarawan, tell us what a fantastic job he's going to do in Thailand over the next couple of years. Please, Anuj, over to you.
Thanks, Sean, for raising the bar and having me in your sights there. But thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the ADB. I'm delighted that this report is coming out. So, we're very excited about the partnership with CBI for Thailand in green infrastructure opportunities development. I sort of probably want to make 2 or 3 key points. You've already done the introduction, so I won't talk much about where I'm sitting in ADB, but really the focus is on trying to catalyze green finance into green recovery projects in Southeast Asia, Thailand included. And that's really the focus of our Green Innovation Hub, which includes the ASEAN Green Facility. And that's what we've been trying to do. Now, to catalyze this green finance, I mean, just look at the numbers. Southeast Asia alone requires something like around $210 billion a year for climate resilient infrastructure. And 40 to 50% of that is a financing gap. So that finance has to come. And how does that finance come in quickly? Is it on a project by project basis? Maybe. But we can also catalyze a lot of financing through capital markets, through bonds. And I look at the example of the Thai sustainability bond led by the PDMO a year and a half ago, as well as by the NHA, actually, the social bond done by them last year. And these are super examples because I think the PDMO bond raised about $1 billion, and that was with very little support from ourselves. But really, it is the PDMO themselves who really sort of led that, and that just showed the amount of capital that can flow with good bonds, well-structured, good frameworks, and underlying sub-projects. And that's a great example which can be replicated across the country, across the region. And that's what I'm sort of excited about trying to sort of replicate. So, given that context, given that we need finance to flow in through issuances of bond, in the region as a whole, in Southeast Asia, I think cumulatively, the issuances of bonds, of green, social, sustainable bonds was something like around 12 billion. Sean would know this better, the data. But that's a very small percentage of the global total. And it's a very small percentage of what we need, the 210 billion per year. So we need to really scale up the amount of issuances by bonds at the sovereign level, non-sovereign level, city governments, etc. And a big part of that is identifying where that money will be used, number one, projects, and how it will be used, frameworks. So it's really about the bond structure, the identification of projects, as well as the policy which identifies selecting a project to be green eligible or not. And in a sense, that's what the GIIO report sort of aims to do. It tries to identify green infrastructure investment opportunities, which is a super important document, therefore, to help identify where funding can go and therefore inform the global pools of capital that yes, there are good green investment opportunities here. So, we are very excited. I've seen the impact that the GIIO reports of the CBA have had in previous instances. And I think it's a great way to kickstart a further flow of capital, I hope, into further bond issuances in the country. And I very much look forward to partnering, further with Thailand in the actual implementation of some of these ideas into further bond issuances this year. I hope next year. We've already got technical assistance funds ready and for use in Thailand and the region. And I hope we can deploy some of that as we go forward. So with that, I'll stop and hand back to you, Sean. Thank you very much for letting me make these comments.
Thank you so much, Anuj, and thanks for all the work you've done to grow this market in the area. The global green bonds market is currently sitting at about 56 trillion baht in size. This is no small market now. This is a major market. The green and sustainable bond market, including variations, blue bonds, social bonds, and so on, is sitting at about 90 trillion baht. That's pretty major. And it's growing at 80% per annum. So this issuance that we've seen from BCS, we'll hear a little bit about it later, from, of course, the PDMO, are contributing to, I'm going to say, a seismic shift in investor appetite and investor interest, or at least I think that's what's the case. We're going to hear from Vashirawan, whether I'm right, earlier from the Government Pension Fund later on, but certainly internationally. These things are oversubscribed. Am I speaking out of turn, Vashirawan? Is yes. The appetite there for you?
Yes, sure. So you want me to start now?
No. I was just
okay.
making a bit of light comment and getting the discussion going, because really we now need to hear from Krista, and then I'll come back to you to hear the GPF story a little later, which is an important story. Krista, in the meantime, what we need is a lot more supply. We need a lot more green bonds, green finance, because the investor appetite is strong. And the purpose of this report is to outline investment opportunities in Thailand that could be used not just for green bonds or other things. Krista, lead us through the report. Tell us the highlights, please.
Thank you, Sean. If I can get the slides up on the screen, hopefully you can see them actually on the screen now.
It's good.
Great. And welcome everybody also on my behalf. As Sean mentioned, I'm Krista, the head of market intelligence research at Climate Bonds Initiative. I'd like to thank all of our panelists and the stakeholders that were consulted for this report for joining us today. We certainly couldn't have done this work without you, so very much appreciated. And obviously to the audience as well. So before we get into the findings of this particular report, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context as to this Green Infrastructure Investment Opportunities, or GIIO for short, report series, which we've been producing for several years now. This report series is really intended to highlight these opportunities and infrastructure funding gaps and how we can address these via green finance mechanisms, including green bonds, obviously, as we've just heard in the introductions from Sean and Anuj, and we focus on emerging markets where potentially the green bond markets and sort of green debt mechanism markets might be nascent, but there's certainly a sort of key need for building and upgrading climate smart infrastructure in the coming decades. And we're intending this to be facilitative of engagement between key stakeholders, so investors, project owners, and developers, who we're lucky to be joined by here today as well. And all of these reports that we've listed on the right-hand side here are obviously available on the Climate Bonds website, and we'll put the link to the Thailand report in the chat, as mentioned by Sean. So to set the scene, we know that green infrastructure presents a huge investment and growth opportunity globally, but also in the Southeast Asian or the ASEAN country grouping and Southeast Asian region. The general gist of this is that there's $100 trillion US, that's a lot of zeros, financing gap to actually get to a sort of secure level of climate compatible infrastructure in the next less than a decade now. Roughly 3 trillion of this is in ASEAN, and the funding gap per year until 2030, which is really the key decade in which we have to do this, is also up to $100 billion US equivalent. What this means specifically for Thailand, well, if the scenario or the business as usual scenario continues and there isn't really a ramping up of investment quickly, the infrastructure spending gap can grow or widen to up to $100 billion by 2040 for Thailand only. And this is in absolute terms, not on annualized terms. We have done some analysis based on other sources, and this is all obviously in the report as well, but the clear message is that it's really, especially electricity generation for not just heat and cooling especially, but also for transport related applications, as well as telecommunications and the water sectors that have the largest infrastructure funding needs. And you can see roads at the bottom. Obviously, this is very much in relation to the transport related sectors, but we are focusing predominantly on, let's say, traditionally green sectors here and not going and delving into road infrastructure in detail as of now. Well, the messages are clear. Sean and Anuj have both referenced this in the beginning as well. There's a lot of really positive signals from Thailand already. We've seen a total of 22 green bonds issued and several more in social and sustainability bond issuance since 2018. The total volume of green labeled bonds at the end of November of last year was $2.6 billion US. And obviously, we were also really pleased to see the Kingdom of Thailand issuing the Sustainability Post-COVID-19 Recovery Bond that had a sustainability and green tranche, proceeds going to mitigating the immediate socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic, but also to low carbon transport infrastructure. And the latter part of this bond was certified under the climate bond standard as well. So there's really already positive momentum ongoing. In terms of the broader context, we think, based on the findings and the extensive stakeholder consultations, that Thailand is really well positioned to attract green capital from abroad as well, thanks to these issuances that have been completed, but also the ongoing sustainable finance initiatives across different sectors. I'd like to highlight, obviously, we're joined by representatives from the SEC today, For example, the SEC Sustainability Development Roadmap, which was crafted in 2019 and then integrated into the strategic planning of the Commission from 2020 to 2022. So we're still ongoing. The SEC also joined as a kind of formal supporter of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, in January of 2021. We were also very pleased to see the joint sustainable finance initiatives from this dedicated working group, which we've listed the participants of here, and there's more information in the report itself. This was in the second half of last year. And one of the notable proposed strategic initiatives from this group includes defining a practical taxonomy for Thailand. And we are known to be great proponents of these green classification systems or taxonomies here at CBI, and we'll talk a little bit in a moment about how we've leveraged our own climate bonds taxonomy to do this analysis of the investable project pipelines in Thailand. So to that point, what could be labeled as green infrastructure? Here's some examples, all of these derived from the CBI taxonomy, which is in its at least 10th iteration now. I've lost track, but essentially it brings insights and quantifiable indicators from our sector-specific criteria in the climate bond standard that we can then use to analyze anything from individual assets and projects up to entire issuers more recently. Some of these key categories you can see link up pretty neatly to the infrastructure funding gaps that we've just discussed. So renewable energy being the predominant category here, joined by obviously low carbon transport. We've seen issuances to that effect already, and projects certainly as well, but also sustainable water and waste management and wastewater management as well, and buildings, which is also very much on this list. And we'll start with renewable energy, since this is really the key to sort of enable the transition of many other sectors as well to a low carbon and resilient future from a real assets and infrastructure point of view. The analysis finds that Thailand needs to install another 8 gigawatts of electricity generation capacity to achieve the target that the government has set for 2036 of almost 20 gigawatts. We've seen really positive signals here too, not on this slide, but in the report we discuss, for example, the fact that 80% of the new generation capacity that was installed in 2020 was indeed renewable, and more than 90% of that was solar and wind. So you can see that the shift is underway. This would obviously help with building Thailand's energy security and reducing the reliance on natural gas, which we do consider not to be a transition fuel at this point. And there are ample investment opportunities in especially solar, wind, and also waste to energy, which we'll talk about in the context of also waste management momentarily. Renewable energy overall obviously is eligible for green bond financing itself. Pardon me, on the low carbon transport side, so we know that there is a big need to upscale mass rapid transportation infrastructure to tackle congestion, but also to yield these massive reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that are needed. And we've highlighted the government's Transport and Investment Action Plan from 2017, which is still very much valid. This already in itself outlines an investable pipeline of almost 20 priority projects, just under USD 90 billion equivalent. So there's certainly room to maneuver here. And finally, on the water and waste management point, so water infrastructure, if we start first on the left-hand side, is eligible for private investment also in the government's Public-Private Partnerships Act from 2019. And also the water supply development and management strategy for the priority economic area that leads up to reaches up to 2037, identifies a whopping number really of 53 eligible projects worth around $1.6 billion equivalent. On the waste management side, we know that plastic waste in particular, in the absence of appropriate management infrastructure, is indeed an issue. This is evidenced, for example, by the fact that the average per capita annual generation rate of plastic waste in Thailand was 74 kilograms in 2018 versus or compared to a world average of about 29 kilograms. So obviously we could utilize waste to energy and chemical recycling applications, especially, which there's also already lots of activity around. Very happy to see. This is a really key measure for Thailand to achieve its bio-based economy goals, which reach across the economy, as it says, and green bonds can and have been used to finance this type of infrastructure as well. And I just want to leave you with a couple of examples of projects. I'm only going to highlight two here just in the interest of time, so we can actually get to the panelists who will have the sort of really interesting nuance and valuable things to add to this conversation. There are 17 in total to a pipeline of more than $30 billion that we have highlighted in this report. So immediately sort of investable, in theory, certainly at least, projects. This project here actually combines 16 different solar power plants and has a power production peak capacity of 98 megawatts. So if you bring that back to the targets of the government that we've alluded to previously, this is already a big jump in the right direction. This was actually financed, or these plants and this project were financed with a green bond in 2018, and this was arranged solely by our friends over at the Asian Development Bank. So definitely commendable effort from there. And the proponent or the catalyst for this project was Grimm Public Power Company Limited, who is one of the stakeholders that we consulted for this work. And then the MRT Purple Line project from the Ministry of Transport, Mass Rapid Transit Authority of Thailand. There was this project was in the planning phase last summer and is indeed meant to upgrade and build additional capacity to a rail system that runs a total length of almost 25 kilometers in the capital city of Bangkok, and a pretty valuable project as well, $3.8 billion. We will most likely hear more about the government bond, part of the proceeds of which went to a part of the MRT metro line expansion in Bangkok as well. And with that, I would like to say thank you for listening. Do go and read the report, give us your thoughts, feedback, ask questions in the chat. We'll have myself and the team on hand to answer your questions, and Sean might even pick up some of them for the panel to address. And hereby handing over to Sean to get us going with the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista. Yes, note the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. At any stage, you can ask questions, and we will attempt to try and find an answer for you or put it to the panel. I'd like to actually ask John Kwon from the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Assistant Secretary General, to join us and kick off remarks about, I guess I'm interested to know, John Kwon, from your perspective, SEC, why this is important, and you put so much work into growing this. I'd like to know the story, including the work that's happening on taxonomy and so on going forward. But please, over to you. Kick us off. You're on mute, unfortunately. Thank you.
Yes, you can hear me now, right? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Krista, for mentioning about the SEC roadmap towards the sustainable financing. I can say that for SEC Thailand, the sustainability agenda has been our, key flagship and our top priority. But of course, we cannot do this alone. We need the actions of all key stakeholders in the whole ecosystem to move towards the same direction. So our job is to strengthen key drivers in terms of the supply side, the demand side, and also other enablers to help, support the whole sustainability ecosystem. Let me start from the supply side. We have the CG code that, the code help us, and also the listed company to build up their own corporate culture more efficiently. And we also require them, the listed company, to disclose the ESG responsibilities in their annual report. We call that the one report. So they need to show how they integrate the ESG responsibilities in their business strategy and also their operation. And right now we have seen a very great awareness among large companies because our 24 Thai listed companies are included in Dow Jones Sustainability Emerging Index already. That's marking Thailand the top inclusion among ASEAN for 8 consecutive years already. But anyway, we know that requiring the listed company to disclose the ESG information is useless if our investor don't care about that information. So we have to create the market force or the demand from the investor at the same time. And for this matter, we have the I code, the investment governance code, and we do encourage the institutional investors to integrate the ESG factors into their investment decision-making process. And right now we have like 75 institutional investors with AUM over $300 billion become the signatories under the I code, the investment governance code, and GPF is one of that. Maybe
that's a great success. That's fantastic.
Yes. And that's what the supply and the demand side. But besides from that, we also have to strengthen other enablers, including the promoting of the issuance of the ESG bonds that Krista already mentioned about that. The ESG bonds include the green bond, social bond, and also the sustainability bonds. And last but not least, the SLB, the sustainability linked bond as well. Not only waiving the relating fee, the approval fee and the filing fee, but we also have ADB and CBI supporting the technical assistance for our local reviewer for those bonds. So thank you so much for that. And, because this is very important because for Thai firms, overseas reviewer is quite, expensive and very hard to access. And good news is that CBI has approved TRIS rating Thailand to be our first local green bond verifier. And right now we have seen a very promising trend of ESG bonds. For the past 3 years, the total value of the ESG bond issuance is almost like $10 billion already. You heard that from Krista. And another important enabler is to create the visibility of the ESG bonds. So the bulletin platform where the demand can meet with supply is another key driver. And we have the Thai Bond Market Association to provide the bulletin platform where investors can find more insight and in-depth information about the ESG bonds. And also by the end of this year, investors can find ESG information, not just the ESG bonds, but also the SRI funds, the socially responsible investment fund, and also information about ESG integration of the listed company on the SAC application as well. We are working on that. And those are the overview of what we have done so far to promote the sustainability financing in Thailand. Thank you, Sean.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic the journey that you've been on and that we've all been on in Thailand. And of course, from our perspective, it's such a nice story to take to the world about the we have some enormous environmental challenges ahead of us, not only according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, do we have to reduce global emissions rapidly by 55% by 2030 to be able to maintain a stable climate going forward. But we also have to prepare for a volatile 21st century because climate change is now with us. When we talk about reducing emissions, we're talking about reducing emissions to avoid catastrophic climate change. That would be flooding right through the center of Thailand on a regular basis. Whatever happens, we will have increased flooding. Sea level rises are increasing. Storm surges are going up. Temperatures will get hotter. All of these things we've got to prepare for. In a conversation I was having in Dubai with the ministers a few days ago, we were talking about how Dubai will have consecutive weeks of 60 degrees Celsius temperatures in the next 30 years, which will have to lead to a change in the tensile strengths of the steel that's been used, in the built environment, the glass, won't necessarily survive that level of heat. We have to look at resilience. And of course, we'll hear from Surat later, but when we're building infrastructure now, like railway lines or metro lines in Bangkok, we are already now starting to think about the kind of resilience given volatile climate going forward and how we prepare for that. There's a lot to be done on the mitigation resilience. This thematic market, green bonds and other relations like blue bonds, are a part of matching investor demand with the kinds of projects that will address these concerns. That's what's exciting about this, because the investor demand, well, globally is extraordinary for this now, because people understand the long-term risks to their portfolios. Allianz, BlackRock, State Street will tell me that they're concerned 20 years and 30 years out. They're going to have an assets and liabilities matching problem if we don't see society address these environmental challenges. That's the global picture. But the question is, to what extent have domestic investors caught up with this? We've already heard from John Kwan about the signatories so far, but of course we have today a representative of the most important investor in Thailand, from my perspective anyway, which is the Government Pension Fund. Vashirawan, over to you to give your thoughts on this issue and how GPF is seeing it, and of course the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. I'm so delighted to be part of today's panel discussion. And GPF, we publicly announced our commitment to ESG investing since 2018. So I would like to share our views and thoughts on the ESG experience and our journey that we pursue all along. So certainly today's topic on the green infrastructure is one of the key pillars in the GPF ESG investing. It's about the environment and how we could restrain the climate change to the benefit of our country. However, there are other two pillars as well that are also important to GPF. They are about social and governance aspect. And ESG investing that GPF make it at our heart center is that we try to make contribution to the sustainable society. We aim not to bring only the sustainable return to pension fund members, but also the social return to the public as well. So as the universal asset owners, we have to go beyond the financial returns. And it's our challenge to analyze the linkage of ESG factors and the potential impacts that the ESG has on each of the asset class. So the failure to take the ESG factor into the account can be considered as taking risks that may cause a huge financial loss as well. We have been integrating ESG consideration internally and externally. So we have our own models to incorporate the ESG scores into the credit scores internally. And we also do the active ownership via voting rights. And we do the engagement with the companies on ESG master for more than 10 years. And for external investment, we also incorporate ESG as the part of our fund selection process. We use the ESG due diligence questionnaires to understand how the outsourced fund manager integrate ESG factors into their investment process. So we have done many things to help raise the awareness of the ESG investing to be the crucial part of the community of our financial institution. And on the corporate side, we have our engagement and stewardship actions would encourage the Thai corporate to be more transparent in disclosing the information and improving ESG norms in their practice. And as I mentioned, GPF have a keen interest and strong appetite for ESG investing. We already invest in various issues of green bonds, social bonds, and sustainability bonds. We were also the key cornerstone investor of the first sustainability-linked bond in Thailand that issued by a large corporate. These ESG bonds provide a good fit to our investment framework. And on this panel, we are hearing about the potential supply and opportunities of green infrastructure projects. This is very exciting for us indeed. And we think that it's a great opportunity for Thailand to capture and transform to a greener and more sustainable economy and remain globally competitive. So GPF is more than willing to be a part of this development and will certainly support the green projects that will help improve the climate, strengthening our society and our country in a better way. Yes, that's it for me for the first part. Yes, thank you.
Fantastic, Fasharan. I think the comment you made, some of the listeners might not be aware of, but it's a really important term, a universal owner. You are a universal owner in Thailand, which means you're an investor, for our listeners, you're an investor that will benefit by the rise of the whole economy because you're so large and so important. Being able to pick your way through an economy that has difficulties is not really an option. And this is the interesting thing about important and large investors like the government pension fund, the extent to which they're appreciating that the betterment of society and the growth and development of our people is actually important for returns to be able to pay pensions in the future. That bringing together is what's underpinned the global movement behind capital with purpose that's embodied in ESG bonds, in green bonds and various others. So Bashir, it's great to hear your comments about that, and I appreciate it. And might come back to that in a minute. What I'd like to do now is to go to the, let's call it the flagship issuer of Thailand, Parosh Huttacharawan, who's the senior expert on bond market development and public debt management office in Thailand, the Ministry of Finance, and we've spoken before about the exciting thematic issuance. Tell us the story of how it went and how investors responded.
Thank you for the invitation once again to join the panel. As everybody understands that urgent issues to address climate change, in particular in Thailand, we are very prone to climate change disasters, drought, floods. Even our economy rely heavily on sectors like agriculture, even tourism on the coast. So it's urgent for the government has actually for a long time incorporate climate change address projects in their plans. The Prime Minister once again made a big statement at COP26 about CO2 emission reduction. So what we could do, the Ministry of Finance, obviously we can support on the financing side. We are the sole borrower for the government, and we just came up with a policy to, while we want to just meet the funding needs, we want to actually, do more for climate change and social risk as well. So that came about the first issue of the sustainability bond. The value for the first year was over 100 billion, and for this year, fiscal year, I think we expect to double that by the end of this fiscal year. Which is the 15-year tenor. I think we made a commitment. Obviously, liquidity has been an issue. If you look at other sovereign that done before us, we want more liquidity. So we actually sacrificed the entire 15-year tenor, which is very important tenor for the Thai government, entirely for the ESG. And as a result, investors were more confident and understand that the Thai government is going to keep doing this. It's not a one-off thing. It's not a PR gimmick that we're going to do one-off and then stop. And we kept that promise. We kept issuing it every quarter. And we had investors from all over, domestically, from banks all the way to the bigger funds, insurance companies. And we were pleased to see some offshore investors as well, 16, 20%. So that's been a very diverse group. Investors. The initial price was tighter than the normal 15-year benchmark. So from that point of view, there was benefit there as well. We are at this point in time, I think we want to try to find more projects, obviously to be financed by the ESG bond. Because what we did with the framework was we covered all ranges of sectors, from water to electricity, coastal preservation, and other social inequality issues. So there's a lot more to do. We made a great start, obviously, but I think the important thing now is that we keep going, keep the momentum up, just to meet, as you mentioned, the demand that has been growing massively all over. Obviously, all the European funds a lot ahead with the explicit mandate. We hope to see more of that, in the Thai, domestically, that we, more investors have a probably more sort of explicit mandate to invest into ESG as well, to to keep this momentum going.
Big story, Parosh, and it's fantastic you've done it. I mean, of course, for our listeners, sovereign issuance is not only important in its own right to raise funding for the government and to ensure that it goes in the right direction from the point of view of investors, but it's also critically important to grow a larger corporate market. It provides liquidity, it provides benchmark pricing, yield curves, and so on. So the Thai government's, the PDMO issuance has been very important, we think, for setting out a demonstration of what can be done in the future. But of course, Surath, at BTS, you were ahead of the pack. You were a leader in this particular space. Can you tell us your story and the reaction and where the funds are going, and dive in, please, because it's an exciting story.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Hi, everybody. I guess we were, everybody knows that we operate in rail mass.
And Zuref, I forgot to say, we have
at the
managed
moment
to get. I need to say we have managed to get the chief financial officer of BTS here. This is a coup for us. So I just want to say thank you so much for being able to join us.
Thank you for the introduction. Currently, we operate about 60 something kilometers of rail mass transit, and next year we will double that. And thanks to the financing that we raised from green bonds back in 2019, that was the first green bond that we issued, and that was the first green bond to be issued under SEC guidelines. So we thank you, SEC, for that also. Maybe I'll touch a little bit on the first green bond that we issued that was placed to institutional investor and also high net worth. We were very, very happy about that. Actually, since we were the first one, we thought a lot of how we were going to issue it successfully. The first challenges that we faced was the taxonomy, which Krista talked about a little bit earlier, but I won't go deep into that. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand the taxonomy, and at the end of the day, we found that we probably very comfortable to go with the CBI guidelines and whatnot, right? Again, we also have to educate the market of what green bond is or was, because that was new in the market. And usually when we do a bond roadshow, it usually takes about 1 hour. So we decided to dedicate about half an hour talking about green bonds and the green bond frameworks and whatnot. So to my surprise, I saw, the people who attend our roadshow, their eyes sparkles, and they were quite excited to hear about this new green bond or sustainable bonds, and we got a lot of questions on that. So I was really happy about that, right? When we decided to price the bond in terms of when the book building come, collectively, we also discussed with our arranger that we would not penalize the investor per se. We should just price the bond as if it was a normal plain vanilla bond. So we just want to, give a fair coupon, fair yield to investors, from our point. And we were very delighted to receive, more than 8 times, bid ask, over subscription, more than 8 times.
8 times.
Initially, we want to issue about only 5 billion. 8 times. Wow. Times. Yeah. We wanted to issue about 5 billion baht, and the book build came in at about 42 billion. Right. So that suggested how there was actually a lot of demand that was not realized before, that was there to 2019. So in that, I think it would probably be music to the finance guy that we were able to price the bond very, very tightly in terms of cost saving and whatnot, and we were quite happy about that. Since we have Kun Vachiyawan here, SEC here, Kun Jamkwan here, we also have to thank SEC again for waiving our listing fee. 2019, we were very happy about that, and our board was also very happy about that. So it was quite a great success. Last point I'd like to mention was that on back of the 8-time oversubscription and tight pricing, and also SEC waiver of the fees, 40% of the investor were actually new to us. 40%.
40%. That's
40%.
huge.
Never invest in our bond before. So we also very, very happy about that, to be able to expand our investor base. So on back of that, we decided to issue green bond every year and then try to find new green projects every year. My last point was that the green bond that we issued was used to finance monorail, Pink and Yellow Line. Pink Line and Yellow Line. Pink Line runs across north of Bangkok. Yellow Line runs towards the east of Bangkok. In total, about 63 kilometers. Should be fully open next year. And when it's fully open, it should help reduce about 140,000 tons of CO2 emission in Bangkok. And what we told to investors was that this is a good opportunity for them to finance a project which would help bring cleaner air to Bangkok.
Fantastic. Of course, it reduces emissions, it brings clean air, and it makes it easy to get around the city, because when you're stuck in one of those traffic jams in Bangkok, you wish for BTS. So it's a fantastic. And I appreciate what you've said about continuing issuance in this area. That's great news. The 40% new investors is a very interesting statistic that you've raised. And I'm just going to go back to John Kwan now and ask, at the Securities and Exchange Commission, I appreciate you've been supporting the development, including waiving fees for BTS and so on. But you must be incredibly pleased to hear that these bonds have been so oversubscribed and they're getting at tighter pricing, and we are getting new investors and so on. Tell us, well, first, I hope I'm right in saying that. And I'm curious, John Kwan, what do you see as the next steps for the SEC in growing this market? What can people expect in the coming 12 months?
I have to say that let me show you that in this 12 months, what I really see is that the big company will move towards the sustainability agenda. But what we are struggle and we try to fix the problem is that if we talk about the listed company like BTSG, BTSG is like one of the good example that show that the company has great awareness about the sustainability issue. But if we talk about the small company, they are quite struggle to survive, especially under the pandemic situation. What they need is that they want to access the capital at the lowest possible cost and to move towards the sustainability agenda and disclose all those ESG information that I just mentioned to the public investors. To disclose this kind of information, we have to admit that the small firm have to pay extra costs, and they have to involve extra work procedures to do that. We have to admit that. So for another 12 months, I think what we are trying to do is to face with these challenges and to fix the problem for the small and medium firms. And you also think about this firm, if they want to issue the green bond like BTSG have done so far, this firm, they have to pay the extra cost if they want to issue that kind of bond, because they have to pay for the external reviewer and also the reporting, and maybe the cost of funding may not be lower than traditional bond. Maybe Kun Surayut can also add on this, because the coupon is maybe the same as before. So most of the small firms are quite, not willing or ready to move towards this agenda. So what we have done so far, and also in another 12 months, we try to fix this problem by using what we call the peer pressure. And number two is that we try to taking a step-by-step approach for the disclosure as well. We have got to remove from voluntary basis 2 years ago for the disclosure of the ESG integration in the annual report. We started 2 years ago with the voluntary basis. But this year, we applied the mandatory requirement for all listed companies. And at the same time, we set a clear and concrete direction for them that SEC confirmed to move to this direction, and all listed companies have to follow. That's what we have done so far. And also, we believe in the knowledge sharing and capacity building. This is very important, and we think that the large firms, the large listed company, can be mentors for the small and medium firms in this matter. That's for the issuer or the supply side. And for the demand side, it's not hard to have commitment from institutional investors like GPF, but it's hard to make retail investors give up the short-term return and care more on firms' sustainability and long-term value creation. So SEC have to work together with our financial intermediaries, the regulated entities like brokers and mutual funds, asset managers and like that, and also their salespersons to create the awareness at the point of sale. We have to make the retail investors see how ESG responsibilities are important for them in terms of it can affect the performance of the invested company. Like if we think about the risk, the cost of capital, and the investment return that investor are going to get, especially in the long term. Also, we are planning to launch some kind of SRI fund. We are on the process of, drafting the guidelines for the socially responsible investment. We can, I think we can see that guidelines pretty soon, and we foresee that in 12 months there will be someone who launch, the asset manager who launch that kind of funds and distribute to the investing public and build up the awareness among the retail investor. And also to support the issuance of ESG products. The Fiscal Policy Office, Kun Parot with us here today. The office, the FPO, the Bank of Thailand, the Office of Insurance Commission, the Stock Exchange, and also the SEC have joined together. And we set up the Financial Sector Working Group on the Sustainable Finance to develop the policy framework in Thailand, including the local taxonomy for the green bonds, to create the common definition which are appropriate to the local context. And right now we are in the process of inquiring technical experts in each industry to help develop the screening criteria and also the threshold as well. And we expect to issue the consultation paper by the first half of this year. Not just the local taxonomy, we also work with other jurisdictions to create the Asean Taxonomy as well. And the first version, I think, was launched in November last year, and is under the right now it's available for public comments, and it will be in the hearing period will end like this first quarter of this year. So you can see that from the ACMF website, the Asean Taxonomy. So we are working on that. And last but not least, for those who are not ready to issue the green bond, social bond, or sustainability bond, we also promote the issuance of the SLB, the Sustainability Linked Bond, to wider participation of issuers with transitional goal in various sectors, because we believe that this bond can be a credible transition solution, because it allows firms to set a target and timeline on decarbonization over time. And those are the major examples that I think that is going to happen in this 12 months forward. Thank you, John.
That's quite an agenda, John Kwan. That's quite an agenda. We've got a lot happening. I actually want to ask Suresh a question now, because he talked about the importance of taxonomy. And as you said, you're rolling out one and it'll be coming out. I'm curious, Suresh, from your perspective, how important do you think this work on taxonomy that the SEC is managing going forward is? And also, what other things do you think it's important to deliver to improve capital flows to these green investment opportunities you've identified?
Yeah, based on our experience, having a single taxonomy is very important, so that people who company who wants to issue ESG sustainable bonds don't have to do too much homework, try to understand the various definition and standards and whatnot. We just can look to SEC1, so that would save a lot of time. When back in 2019, I have about two people spending maybe a month or so trying to understand all this and explain to me, and I also had to explain to the board also. Right, so with SEC initiative, then everybody can say this is SEC taxonomy, and we can just hit and run. Right. On second point, what would help increase the flows? I think I'm not sure whether it's already out there or not, but in terms of incentive or maybe requirement on asset allocations, especially on the fund managers, fixed income side, maybe can they get like cookie points for allocating some portion in ESG bonds? That would help a lot. That would help a lot in terms of the money manager, and in terms of issuer like us who use the proceeds to finance new projects. We are now working with certain banks on exploring sustainable loans, whereas we set KPI with the banks, and if we meet that, then we would have a coupon reduction. But if we don't, we just pay a normal coupon. I'm not too sure whether the bank get any incentive from the BOT, because at the end of the day, they would have to reduce their spread for us. So I think also BOT have some maybe incentive that they can make to the banks also. And lastly, a lot of infrastructure projects are the concession projects bid out by the government agencies. It would be great also if they give cookie points for operators and for the bidders who have good records of ESG financing ESG projects.
Great points. I've got to ask Bashirawan that question now, because you talked about brownie points for investors if they're investing in a sector. Bashirawan, do we need this? Would that be useful, or are your internal risk calibrations already providing you a strong incentive to go in this area? What's your reaction to what Suresh is saying on the investor side?
Sorry, about what again, please?
He's talked about the perhaps the benefit of having incentives for investors to invest. I mean, have you got enough incentives? Do you think further incentives are required? Well, what does it look like from inside the government pension fund?
Actually, for government pension fund, we don't have the limitation about the tax or anything. So actually, it's not the incentive for us. But by the way, by the concept, we can pour our whole portfolio into the ESG bonds. There's no limitation on that, and be willing to do that. But only that for the moment, the supply may not be large enough for us to select the right ones to fill in.
Thank you. I mean, the real challenge is
for the other investor. I think that those of corporate size, when for their own portfolio, for their investment, it's maybe the incentive for them. But for the mutual fund, I don't think that the tax incentive will help a lot. They're not subject to tax as well.
When you're investing in green bonds and social bonds and so on, do you have internal mandates, or are you switching in major allocations and just slowly increasing? How are you managing it inside GPF?
Actually, I think the ideal thing is that the whole portfolio can be, those kind of ESG. We not limit, it's not the different asset class. We can blend, the whole things into our existing ones. So actually, we hope that in the long term, there is no normal bond, it's all the ESG bond. I hope that, ESG is the norms for everyone. No differentiate between the normal one and the ESG one.
Parosh, that sounds like quite an ambition. What's your reaction from the PDMO point of view? Can you see that happening? The slow merging of investor appetite for purpose and the PDMO program?
I think from our side, we don't have a cap on how much we want to issue the ESG. I mean, if demand is there, I think we are very open to exploring new tenors for the green, blue, social bond, or even a dollar green. But I think the problem there is finding the right projects. I think I mentioned this quite a few times. With a government, it's difficult. We have 30, 40, 50 different departments, doing different things. It's not like corporate where you have sort of investment side and finance on the same side. So sometimes it is difficult to get the right projects in the right amount. So we are working on that. In the framework, we have a committee set up that includes all the people involved, and we are trying to push for a more sort of a top-down policy on trying to divert more projects towards ESG bond issuance. So that's one way we will try to do. That's probably the main thing that we are doing to make sure that it can grow as Kunvachiya one wishes.
That is fantastic. Of course, for those of us that are concerned about the forward risks for Thailand in these areas, it's really excellent news that you've got that conversation going internally about allocation of proceeds. I mean, the Green Infrastructure Opportunities Report that we've just launched is an attempt to try and flesh out more areas and more opportunities. And clearly, in the report, they're commercial or government projects. But it would seem, well, let me put it this way. Every government I'm speaking with that's issued green bonds, from the German government to the Nigerian government, is having difficulty finding new assets because the bond program has been so successful. They want to grow it, and they're talking to different ministries about what they can do: clean energy, water, of course, low carbon transport, buildings, as in energy efficient buildings and so on. All these are flushed out. So, but it is a challenge, isn't it? It requires everyone to start tracking and identifying stuff that they may not have identified before in this way. How has been the response from your ministries to this agenda? I mean, are people getting their act together quickly, or is it a slow and hard task for you to get this work happening in the ministries?
Well, I think the short answer is hasn't been fast, hasn't been quick. Right. It's sort of I think we just have to keep sort of plugging away. And I think, but at least the conversation has started. I think that's a good start for us. There's been some movement. We discussed some projects. So that's so we hope to have some more in the pipeline. But also I have to mention that it's not just the government. There's SOEs as well. There's some big SOEs who actually have the capacity, who have, I think, the right projects are yet to come in. So I think there's a lot of room to maneuver in there as well.
Do you have any new targets that you're willing to disclose to us in this webinar?
Well, like I mentioned, we can for sure, I think, commit another 100 billion from the debt office.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, this year. So it will be over 200 billion for the 15-year tenor. And we are actually active. I think we do want to extend the curve to other tenors as well.
Fantastic. Can I ask you a question about appetite? I mean, Suresh was talking about the oversubscription levels, which is a fantastic story. In terms of your appetite, you also had strong demand. Tell us about domestic versus international and what you saw there and the kind of inquiries. Give everyone a flavour of, if you're able to.
Yeah, I think the initial launch was 30 billion, and we had I think two or three times BCR coming in as well, so big oversubscription, and we had around I think 20% from offshore investors coming in for the ESG bond as well, and another indication. I mean, I can't confirm that it's entirely because it's an ESG, but if you look at the past 3 or 4 months, the demand for bond hasn't been great, at the current interest rate environment. But the demand for the 15-year has been actually the strongest we have, and it's actually quite a longer tenor. So I think that's a good sign. Perhaps there is a genuine appetite for the green, even when the market is not, accommodative for such a long tenor.
That's pretty cool. That's a great signal to anyone else out there who's interested or thinking about doing lessons going forward. We've had a couple of questions in the chat that I'll just throw at you. John Kwan, we've had Tris as the first Thai-based verifier, of course. Do you see interest at the moment from other organizations in doing this? What's your feeling about other Thai-based verifiers? Is that likely to grow, or will it end up being Tris and, say, the big four accounting firms and others going forward? What's your hunch about the ecosystem?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand your question. You mean my thought about the others?
Verifiers. Yes.
How they see this is important, or right?
I guess it's a question about the services being developed in Thailand, because you're trying to grow the market. Do you see interest from other organizations in getting involved? Will we see a larger ecosystem of support services going forward, or is it hard work?
Okay, you mean other organizations that would like to, promote this as well, like joining with the SEC and move at the same direction, something like that?
Well, Suraif did talk about the Bank of Thailand, so we'll talk about that. But also other verifiers coming in as well. I guess it's a bigger question. We need a lot of actors to make this a big market, to be able to support the issuers and support the investors.
Right.
I guess, are they getting the story?
Yeah, I think at the moment this issue is quite, we got interest among all key stakeholders already, not just the working group among the regulators, but right now we have seen a big move from the investor side and also the issuer side as well. I think most of our Thai company and also the institutional investor, they are moved on the same direction. So in my opinion, I think we got interest in from those key stakeholders that to move in the same direction. And like you just mentioned about the like you asked Khun Parot about the potential green infrastructure in Thailand. I think because of this issue, because of the COP26, because Thailand has announced the commitment to fight the climate change, and the government set a number like reaching the carbon neutrality in 2050 and net zero emission by 2065, and also other policy like the government need a systematic change on that, and I think that we need the big amount of money for building those green infrastructure. So if you're asking about the interest from other key stakeholders, I think this is the right moment because we are introducing the bio-circular green economic model, the BCG model, to fulfill the decarbonization. And I think the government already announced the number of the total investment that the country going to, get this amount to build up that kind of green infrastructure. So I think this is a huge potential for both the public and private sector to leverage on the sustainable financing tools. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And Vashiran, I want to ask a question of you too about pricing, because Suraith and Parash have talked about the pricing benefit that they've received, and the BTS story is pretty exciting given that.
Sorry, Sean, I think your
what
signal
we're seeing is
not
the
stable.
reason for that.
Your signal is not stable. Please repeat again.
My apologies, Bashirawan. Is that any better? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
In the international market, the reason we're seeing tighter spreads on bonds is because the secondary market performance is very strong. And whenever we get a downturn, green bonds hold their value. And whenever we get a crash, like in March of 2020, green bonds stay liquid, which is amazing for investors. And as a result, they're bidding tighter on primary because they're a more valuable product in their portfolio. Are you seeing this? What are you seeing in terms of the pricing and valuation benefits of green and ESG bonds in your portfolio? Is that a characteristic, or are we not there yet in Thai baht?
Actually, I think the market is not for a green bond or sustainability bond is not, it's not deep enough to do the statistic, proven on this kind of thing. But yeah, it's well received that the ESG things is a long-term risk management, so it's probably the good companies have like a lesser than the others in terms of downside risks. So we think that we're willing to pay tighter spread for this kind of issuer, and we hope that we'll be protect our downside risks in the bad times as well. Yeah. And we always, like a support for the good companies, we want to extend our support to them for them to do good things, for in the environment or social or anything. Yeah.
Such an important message to hear from the government pension fund. Everyone out there, really, that is such an important message. We need to move to wrapping up the panel today, and we'll just get some final words from Anuj before we wrap up. So I'd like to ask you for some last comments. But first, there are a couple of questions that have come up. My friend Warwick Prombun has asked about whether we're going to see more second opinion providers. I think, Warwick, the answer is we've got Trees Now who's joined, and we at Climate Bonds, as will the Asian Development Bank, be working with the Securities Commission to see if we can grow that and encourage and educate. So we will see local players, in my view, as we have in all markets, as bond issuance grows. But we need fee income. We need more BTSs to allow a revenue base for those market players going forward. Rob Fowler has asked, will there be an ASEAN verifier or approval system? Not at this stage, but you never know what the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum might come up with. John Kwan, I'll leave that in your courts to think about. At this stage, we're dealing now. In terms of the market going forward, we've heard some exciting thoughts from about the kind of projects that should be funded for green. Waste management, water. It's not just clean energy. It's not just solar or wind or bioenergy. It's also low carbon transport, but not just electric vehicles, which most people think about. It's actually rail and metros. That's the really important part, because that carries transport and has the biggest impact going forward. But I want to stress buildings, because what we are hoping to see going forward is a greater appreciation of, first, the importance of energy efficiency in the built environment, and the recognition that those buildings that are energy efficient can be used for green bonds, green financing, green loans from banks, or sustainable loans. Suresh talked about looking at sustainable loans. Well, building sector is a huge market for that. There's a lot to bring into this story. But I think we need to focus on this year, because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Thai government, talks about the critical importance of addressing our climate challenges going forward at speed. So we want to make a lot of progress this year. I want to ask about your thoughts about the future around the table. What you see as the biggest opportunities, Parosh, for example, where you think the biggest opportunities in terms of assets that you can use for your bond program would be, and of course, about the future of this particular market. But from your perspective, give us your thoughts from your organization's perspective about the sense of opportunity, and I guess your predictions as well. Parosh, perhaps we can start with you.
So I think, like I mentioned, I think we are, having conversations to expand to other sectors. I think the one that I think should be expanding to already is the power energy sector. We have a big SOEs in that sector that have very much ready. It's just about diverting the right projects. And I think we talk a lot with the natural resources ministry. I think for Thailand in particular, I mentioned earlier that tourism, sustainable tourism is, I think, is a big issue. It's a big part of the economy. So coastal preservation, I think that's definitely one area we have active conversation on. And for me personally, I think water management for Thailand has been long overdue. A proper master plan for water management, not just to prevent floods and drought, but also just to make sure that the agriculture sector have sufficient water for that sector. So I think for me personally, this is my view. I think these three sectors is quite urgent.
So there's a lot there. Yeah. Can I go to you, Vashirawan? Your thoughts?
Actually, TPF, we do not have a limitation on any sector investment. So anything good we support. But for me, I think that the most urgent might be about the renewable energies. And also, like Khun Prot said, I think that water management is the one that should we not see much progress on this, but I personally would like to see this thing coming up. Yeah.
I think between the two of you, that's a call to everyone out there working in the water space. Get your act together. Look at financing in this space. There's opportunities here. Suraith, from your perspective, reflections.
Sean, I probably need to look into water management also then, I think we have made good progress on rails, metros, but in terms of intra-provincial buses, I think before COVID, there were about 450 million trips made intra-provincial by buses, commuted by buses. And those emit more than 5 million tons of CO2, direct emission. I think we are looking at that. We are looking at that. Since now we have defined ourselves in terms of we not only will be doing rail, we will cover mobilities. So we are looking at that and looking at opportunities for us to go in and make good changes. I think for me, this is a very exciting opportunity. And having, participate in this forum, here, PDMO, GPF and SEC, I'm excited. I'm sure that we have good support from all the parties involved.
That's a critically important sector you raise, Suraith. So Godspeed. We wish you a lot of support, and you'll get the support around this table with pursuing that idea. John Kwan, as our partner, as the parent to this industry in Thailand, your thoughts about the future, your reflections.
Okay, I mentioned earlier that I like to stress that the sustainable finance, the thing that we are talking about, cannot be achieved by anyone or any organization, but we all, both public and also the private sector, local and intermediate, international organization, we need to join hands in hands and drive this agenda together. And it's very important we have to act now, not later. And the change, can only happen when everyone participates in this together. That's why I try to mention that we have to strengthen the whole key stakeholders in the ecosystem, not just the supply side, not just the demand side, or not just the products or anything, but we have to move at the same direction together for all, especially for all key stakeholders. in Thailand. And also we so glad to get involvement and help and support from CBI and ADB as well. Thank you.
That was a great segue to ADB, who of course is always helpful and will be even more helpful now that Anuj will be managing the Thai office of it. Anuj, over to you for some final remarks and reflections, and hey, just offer a whole lot of money to everyone in terms of financing.
Thanks, Sean. I mean, it's been such a great panel that it's a privilege to be here listening to everyone. So I'll probably close with sort of just a couple of points, in terms of what we can actually offer to sort of deepen the market. And I think it's already been sort of mentioned. So this is what sort of I manage, the ACGF, the ASEAN Green Facility, which is actually an ASEAN regional cooperation vehicle, right, owned by the ASEAN countries altogether. And up till now, we've collected $2 billion in funding from different sources, including all development and climate partners. And then interestingly, we've used a lot of it for financing projects, but we've also been using some of the grant money there for developing bonds. And that includes supporting the Thai PDMO and NHA bond last year. That number over there, the 4. So, that's what's happened so far. And, the sense was that, deepening the capital markets should be a big part of what we do in the future. So at COP26, we actually announced a green recovery platform, which is being supported by 4 countries. That's the Green Climate Fund with 300 million, the EU with 50, Italy, as well as the UK FCDO. And this is a mixture of funding, which is concessional, almost 0% grant in some cases, as well as grant funding for developing projects. So TA money as well as loan funds. And we've got this to actually develop green projects across the region. Now, what we've said is that we will create a specific strategy on deepening the green capital markets, GSS bonds across Thailand and Southeast Asia over the next 3 years. And what we are trying to say is that we will support anything which is, either a thematic bond issuance being done for the first time, perhaps a blue bond, social bond being done by an SOE for the first time, a first-time issuer, supporting a first-time issuer, especially. I think there's a lot of interest in supporting sub-sovereigns, so municipalities, SOEs, etc. And then anything which is innovative. So can we create an instrument which is a little bit enhanced? So do we create a credit enhanced bond issuance, for example? Now, why we've said that is because I think what comes out very clearly if you're trying to upscale this market is the challenge, which is what we see as fourfold. One is, I think, especially at the sub-sovereign levels, the awareness on issues which some of the other speakers have spoken about. What is the taxonomy? What is the process? And then this fundamental, sort of disconnect between pricing. Is it cheaper to do a bond issuance? Is it, is it a green bond versus another? And that really is at the city SOE level. Number 2 is in terms of development of sub-projects. I think that was brought up previously. What sub-projects can actually be regarded as green or as sustainable, etc., according to taxonomies. Number 3, we've seen a lot of investors asking for assurance on post, the funding flowing in. Will it be used appropriately? And then, of course, financial. So, especially this in sectors like oceans health, wastewater, which a lot of people mention, there is a big perception that the underlying sub-projects may not be financially viable. And therefore, there is an issue in terms of repaying the bond investor. So in terms of what we are trying to do as we go forward, we are trying to meet those challenges. So number 1, we've got, this effort. So we are saying, with our technical assistance, we can actually help in shadow credit ratings, in improving the actual financials of underlying issuers, if that helps, as well as in development of frameworks, as we've done already, and capacity building. So as you know, Sean, we've launched with CBI this effort to bring officials together from different countries to improve an understanding on green bonds. That was done over 4 modules in November. We are happy to do a lot more. Very importantly, to develop the underlying pilot bonds and the sub-projects. So we can actually use our technical assistance funds to actually develop the underlying sub-projects, make sure they're green, that they fit into what would be regarded as a bond use of funds. Number 3 is, the TA support for post-issuance monitoring. So we are also happy to support creation of this M&E system, which can produce the reports, etc., per global requirements for an issuance which is done. And then for me, very, very important, I think the creation of these de-risking funds, because we've had this, told to us by, even at COP, I met the Danish pension funds and some Canadians, and they were all talking about, can this be, can ADB provide de-risking, for example, an exit guarantee for investors in certain new areas? And people especially talk about water, wastewater, oceans pollution. So I hope, that we can actually create these green facilities. There is one which is being developed in Indonesia right now for SDG Indonesia 1, and that could be a great model for developing further in Thailand and in the region. And last point is, love to do a lot more on municipal bonds, because I think that's where the action is, especially when I hear a lot of people talking about water, wastewater, intercity transport. A lot of these projects are basically city level projects, and therefore, there would be a lot of interest in supporting cities in accessing these through the capital markets. So happy to help. We have the funding available. We are supposed to be developing green recovery projects and bonds across Thailand and the region, and look forward to doing much further on that. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Sean. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Anuj, and thank you for the work we've done together the last few years and continuing collaboration and participation. We have an enormous challenge facing our societies and our economies to transition, to become more sustainable, to ensure that our air is air we can breathe, to ensure that water is water we can drink everywhere and it's not polluted, to ensure that our marine ecosystems are healthy and vibrant and not being degraded, but above all, to ensure that we are going to have a future that we can bequeath our children by addressing climate change and averting those long-term risks that are terrifying the climate scientists around the world right now. It is a huge agenda. This issue, when we're talking about specific investments that are funded by specific instruments, are part of that grand solution. When you're here today listening to this call, you are part of a discussion about creating a sustainable future in a real and substantial way, organizing capital to flow towards sustainability. This is the job of the millennia for us all. Thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you, Jongkwon. Thank you, Vashirawan. Thank you, Parosh. Thank you, Suresh. Thank you, Anuj. Thank you, Krista, for the work you're doing first, for being here today and sharing your thoughts. And for all of you on this call, thank you for being part of this mission to create a better future for our children. This video will be available on YouTube in a recorded format, should you be interested. Otherwise, we look forward to the next event participating in. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you. สวัสดีค่ะ